G'day pals, welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be talking about game design tools. And when I say game design tools, what I mean is software that can be used to manage and generate game ideas. So as you're working on your project from the very beginning, when you're just ideating, to when you're actually trying to rationalize and understand the relationships between the systems that you're trying to implement, what are the kind of spaces that we use to manage those ideas? So many of you have seen some of the software that I've spoken about today because I use them all the time on my stream and even here in my YouTube videos. And so today I'm going to explain all of those and the relationships that I have with them. Okay, so let's get into it. So, tools for game design. I have had a pretty interesting relationship with tools like this over the last 10 years or so. I started thinking about doing game design in as early as like 2010, as far as putting together actual efforts to make stuff from when I was in university. And at that time, I was really into these kind of like moleskin kind of notebooks. And Insignia, in fact, started as one of these, character designs and ideas and things like that. And it was a really good way to, just kick off the conversation in my head, right? About all of the things that I was thinking about, right? Just ways of putting down ideas. And I think at the start of any game design project, this is where things begin, right? Just with ideas. And the tools for these ideas are really straightforward, right? They don't have to be complicated. So whether it's the Notes app in your phone or even on a piece of paper, there's no space too small to start placing ideas down about your game. And I find that whenever I'm feeling anxious about something, whether it's a system that I'm trying to balance or things that I'm trying to figure out, even when I'm writing a video, opening up Notepad in Windows and just typing stuff down usually helps me understand it a lot better, right? Seeing the ideas just written down helps you compare them and start thinking about the relationships between them. So Notes apps, they're pretty good for general to-do, writing text, putting ideas down, that's about it. They're not very complicated, they don't do much. From there, I'm a very visual person and I like to draw things. I've always been into drawing, and for a long time, like the best drawing app that I could get my hands on was Photoshop. So again, you could use paper here, but Photoshop for a long time was like my go-to for creating ideas. And you can see here, this is like Armin's house in Insignia, and that was drawn in Photoshop. These canvases have gotten a lot more powerful over time. Now, they are raster canvases. So the concept of a raster canvas is basically just a big piece of paper, right? That's the goal. And apps like Procreate in the iPad space and Leonardo in Windows do a really good job of that, even better than I would say Photoshop. They're really powerful, really efficient, and you can get a lot done just by jotting down, lots and lots of ideas, because the canvases are so powerful that you can scale them to, crazy amounts. And they're good for things like painting, sketching, simple diagrams, annotations, reference boards for art, and mind maps. I want to show you one of my documents here. I've probably brought this up before in the channel, but if you haven't seen it, this is a Leonardo document that I've been working on. It's probably one of the biggest ones that I've got for the second chapter of Insignia. And it's pretty giant, right? And it consists of a bunch of, really kind of like high resolution images, right? From games and film and just stuff from Google where I can sketch next to and sort of like develop ideas, even things like environments in the game where I want to sort of build out some image in my head and take a bunch of references and find that middle point. I think this visual relationship stuff it's really how I like to think about navigating this space. And the fact that it's not just text, the fact that it's literally a space, I think for me helps me get my head around it. And what's crazy is some of these images were created here, literally right here in this canvas. So this painting is one that I did for the second town in the game, Shevitu, and I painted it here. Like I just literally, got a brush and started jotting stuff down. But you can see here, like this equivalent in Photoshop would be like redonkulous. It would be so slow to manage a document this big in Photoshop. I would say overall, there are still issues with tools like this, right? Once you get to a certain size and scale, navigating them becomes a little more difficult because you have to remember where everything is. Zooming out helps. Once you start making decisions about your concepts and ideas, right? You've explored a bunch of space and now you want to start narrowing that space down. Apps like this become a little unwieldy because, text that you want to draw in, it's not text, it's just pictures, right? It's just bitmap data. So you can't actually index that text. If you make decisions about damage values and you draw them into the screen, that's not going to translate back to your game. You're just playing with an advanced piece of paper still. So from here, the next sort of step up is media and HTML canvases. These aren't terms that exist that I know of because all of these apps kind of brand themselves differently. I'm going to call them media and HTML canvases. And the only reason I call this a media canvas is because OneNote, which I was using for a long time, is not really HTML based, but it does a lot of stuff that the next category does. So these are canvases kind of like Leonardo, kind of like Photoshop, but they're more for text entry. You can draw shapes inside of them. You can paste things like links. You can do diagrams. You can do simple sketches that are vector based. So rather than pixels that you're painting on the screen, you're painting lines and points, and you can still do kind of sketches with those. You can embed videos and pictures as well. Although I will say even a document as large as this in OneNote becomes excruciatingly slow when you draw this much vector art. Vector is really efficient to render, but it's really slow once you have enough lines. So the complexity of a vector image actually determines its speed, not the size of it. And if you're trying to experiment with a lot of ideas, becomes kind of impossible to work with. One cool thing about OneNote is that it does have handwriting recognition. So you can actually write and then search what you've written in the search bar, and it will find documents where you've handwritten certain words. It's pretty good. It's not like 100% accurate, but it's pretty good. So, OneNote's pretty good. It's branded as a note-taking app, and I think if you're just doing text, it's not bad. I actually was doing a lot of script writing for Insignia. I won't bring up the document, but script writing for Insignia in OneNote even recently, where I just had like columns of dialogue sequences and I could look back and forth between them saying, okay, this person says this here, and then, oh, okay, over here they say this. So I can make sure that there are no inconsistencies in the dialogue. Maybe one character can be in two places rather than having two different characters that serve the same purpose. So that comparison, still really important. Then the next category is what I call HTML canvases. And I think they make up the kind of like actual apex of this like design sweet spot I want to talk about today. So we've gone from generating ideas, and as we go along, we're trying to like refine those ideas into data that then we can sort of import or refer to for our games. We're kind of making something more concrete. And so HTML canvases like Figma have kind of started to dominate the design space, at least for me. So my background is in user experience design, and I use apps like this, Axure, Figma, Sketch in my professional work. Since then, it's kind of bled over into my game design work as well. The reason why is because feature-wise, they do everything that OneNote would do, but way, way faster. So what kind of happened in this space was originally like Photoshop was just like the tool and Illustrator, and this app Sketch came along, right? So Sketch came along, it's for Mac only, and it was really, really good, really powerful. Kind of general purpose, vector-based, shape-based tool that was built on a web engine. And so you could export a lot of the work you did to CSS styles and HTML like output. And then everyone started using Sketch. And at the same time, Sketch is such a simple and powerful concept for an app and very easy to clone. Figma and Adobe XD came along and kind of just like did the same thing for Windows. Figma is actually free and web-based, so you can actually run it in a browser and you don't need any subscription. You don't need to pay for it. It's just like free. Figma also has team integration, so two people can work on the same doc at the same time, and there's inbuilt voice chat. Honestly, Figma is like one of the most insane pieces of software I've ever used, and it's super powerful for this kind of stuff, right? I want to show you kind of what I mean by like HTML canvas and how powerful that is. So Figma lets you do a bunch of stuff, right? You can have some shapes, you can create, whatever you want. We can do a star here, we can do a polygon. We can do vector, so we can just do like a vector shape, and then we can give that CSS properties. So we can do like a fill if we want. We can give it a stroke, and we can apply that to all of these, whatever we want, right? It's really easy. You can do shape operations. So far this stuff's mostly just vector stuff. I can even press Control E, and now this becomes one shape, and then I can manipulate the points however I like. So making really quick icons when you're talking about your game is really easy, right? Like if I want to talk about some currency in my game, I can say, oh, okay, here's a coin, right? It's 2 cylinders and a little line here. That's like a coin. Put this in front. I could take these 2 shapes and I can union them. The top of the coin, this is the bottom of the coin, make them a nice shiny color. Boom, I've got a coin. In fact, if I make this a component, I can make a bunch of them. And if I change something about the original one, right, they all change. I can even do things like having instances. So like these 2, let's say I want their colors to be a little different. So maybe these are silver coins, but those base properties still apply. Properties that are inherited from the component still apply to all of the child ones. And so beyond this, like obviously because it's just HTML, I can do whatever I want. I can add text, I can press K and scale it up. I can say, okay, let's get this bezier over here. We're going to create a little arrow here. So the end of this shape is like that. This kind of very simple, easy shape manipulation with text is really cool. It's also searchable. So I can say worth and it will say, oh, look, these are the 2 times you've used the word worth. I can take all of this if I want to like isolate this, and I can say Control Alt G. And then I can do a little bit of nesting in that so that I can then create a kind of like a layout. So I can say, okay, I've got 100 here and 100 there. And then I can give this a fill. So now I've got like a background for this little card that I've created around the corners, and you know, now we're flying. I can go as far as I want, creating some more concepts and ideas. And the cool thing is I can then take these and start arranging them. So I can say, well, these ones I want to go horizontally, and then I want to say, you know, this is the coin currency conversion concept. That's 4 C's for you. This is the 4 seasons. You can hold your favorite rallies there. Cool. So it's pretty cool, right? It's pretty manipulable. So this is production grade software, and you can do whatever you want with the images and make them as complicated or as nuanced as you like. You can bring images in and add textures and you know, export this to your game if you want. One thing to note about this HTML canvas space is that Figma, which I still think is like the best option out there, was recently bought by Adobe for like $20 billion. So Adobe's XD just didn't get off the ground. Figma has become the be all end all in this space. Now they're owned by Adobe. So maybe in the next 2 or 3 years, we can expect this to become a subscription-based piece of software. So what I will say is you should look out for apps like Penpot, which are free and open source versions of that. I think at this stage in this kind of like product category, this is kind of like a solved piece of software. Like Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD, and Penpot are genuinely almost identical in terms of their interface, the layout, the keyboard shortcuts, the functions. It's like the same thing. So you can look forward to this being something that becomes more open source and less monopolized in the future. I spent a lot of time inside of Figma. I can show you some stuff that I've been working on not too long ago. So here is another Figma document that I have. And you can see here, this one is one that I've been working on for my kind of game design rationalization for Insignia. I've spent a little bit of time coming back to the core idea for the project and creating just like a vision for like what it is that I want that the game currently isn't doing. Still do that kind of like note-taking, text-based, just thinking stuff out. And then I put together a bunch of templates for like level design. You can see I've got some symbols going on here, got some repeating shapes and ideas that I was like kind of visually concepting. Keeping them at this low fidelity is actually really good for this kind of design because it stops you from over detailing things that don't need to be detailed. There's actual like auto layouts here. So I can take these concepts and I can make them more spaced out or together. So I can arrange things nice and easily, which makes it easier to find them later if I can put them in a nice order. They're searchable, of course. And, once I get to a certain point in this exploration that I feel, okay, let's go a little deeper, then I kind of went to like another level down and did some like enemy designs in this space. These are just imported PNGs from my game, so I can literally just like paste sprites inside of here, and that works too. Doing this kind of thinking it out has been really helpful for me. So thinking about mechanics, other games that have similar mechanics and what they do, trying to just like, break down some of these more specific, interactions that I want in the game, and even down to like dungeon layouts. I've got some components here, and I was pretty easily able to just like mock up a guide for myself, which I would then take into Unity or in Tiled or wherever and start, blocking out the actual thing inside of the game. I'm also using Figma right now for this presentation, just so that you guys can understand how much I use it. I used to use Leonardo, but Figma has become my new best friend. So that's kind of like where the ideation stops. From here, right, if you're not just exporting visual stuff, how do you do more actual data-driven design work, right? How do you manage things like actual in-game text or damage values, things like that? That's where we cross into this more data space. So we've covered ideas, now we're going into data. Of course, if you're not aware of these, it should be pretty obvious. We have Office suites. So, Google Docs, Google Drive, and Office 365, which is now called Microsoft 365. These are obviously good for, storage, word processing, spreadsheets, databases, presentations, and team communications. I personally, as like a solo independent developer, don't use these a lot, mostly because it's kind of heavy duty and a little bit clunky for what I work with. And this is going to kind of become a theme as you go towards more data-driven pieces of software. What ends up happening is the data is harder to manipulate. Once it's entered in, it becomes less malleable, and there becomes a kind of burden where once you've put something down into this format, changing it takes more effort than in the previous formats. So you can design an entire, chapter of a game with some sketches, but actually doing the work of writing all of the script for all of the characters, right? And determining all of the relationships between the quests and how the flags work. Wherever you do that, that's a much, much more tedious and difficult space to work in. So for me, I actually tend to do a lot of my work here and stop. But if you're working in a team, and if you have a game that's much more systems driven and data heavy, then you will find yourself in spaces like here. So, word processing, you want to have, for a word processor, a decent spell checker. You want to be able to work with multiple languages. And in the case of Excel, I've seen Excel used for game translation as well. And you can even do, I think there's some scripts that auto translate with Google Translate the English into the other languages, although you shouldn't do that. It's not very reliable. So Office suites, they're obviously always going to be very useful, but I tend to spend less time in documents. So now's a really good time to mention the kind of elephant in the room, which is the game design document. A GDD is the traditional way of mapping out a game's vision. And especially when you're in a team, it's really important to have a document that explains and explores the core kind of like concept of what a game is. So everything, inside that circle, this is what the game is. This is what a game loop feels like. This is what we as a team are working towards. Now, that description of what a game design document is doesn't really describe what shape it fits within, okay? So I've seen text documents in something like Word or Google Docs be used for GDDs, but I would put to you that it's possible, and maybe even easier, if you could find a better space for it. Maybe something like Notion, which we're about to talk about. Maybe it's something like Figma for a simple enough game. Whatever format you can fit those decisions into, that the whole team can look at and understand and work towards, that's the format it should live in. So I guess I would say, don't restrict yourself just to text word processing documents, because they're great, but they also have the limitations. So the final sort of chapter in this space is databases. Now, Notion isn't just a database, it's kind of more of a project management tool, but a lot of its features work towards this idea of being able to store and understand the relationships between data and build tables and graphs and different ways of presenting any information. So I would classify Notion as essentially a wiki. A wiki is a big database full of articles that can relate to each other in some way. That's searchable, that's editable. So it is very powerful and the data is there. I would say, I think if you're making a game that's very data driven, like a card game or an RPG, I think that there are aspects of the workflow for something like Notion, like a wiki, that will really help you, especially if you're trying to compare the relationships between things. There's a lot of classification going on. Maybe you've got an elemental type, a bunch of cards fit under, and there are rules that apply to all of those cards, and you want to be able to sort of navigate those relationships. That's where something like a wiki, like Notion, becomes more usable. And on the topic of relationships, I don't want to neglect tools like Obsidian, which are kind of like one level deeper in terms of like creating databases out of information that has relations. So Obsidian is branded as a second brain. What it does is it has a bunch of articles that you create, and then you create relationships between those articles with links. It's kind of like a wiki as well, but it is kind of designed to allow you to build it more organically, right? Where just by mentioning other articles, these graphs get created, and the graphs form this really kind of interesting visualization that you can drag around, and you can kind of, I guess, see visually the relationship between all of your ideas. There is value in that sense. I've seen some really interesting Neo4j stuff where they take movie databases and you can do things like search movies by director and then compare movies with director and actors and see like this director worked with this actor this many times on these movies, and those movies also starred this actor, or how many jumps, across the nodes between this actor and this actor. Oh, they both worked with, Steven Spielberg or whatever it is. This is super abstract and probably not really that useful for game development outside of like really, really deep kind of like world building stuff. There's this idea called Zettelkasten, and Zettelkasten is it's a methodology, it's a philosophy, it's an approach to essentially creating a personal database where you take notes and you index them and can hopefully create some kind of relationship between them. I haven't yet found a tool that spans all of this space, where you can take the visual kind of spatial relationships that you can create very easily in something like a raster canvas like Leonardo, and then actually make that data concrete and indexable, and then query and do analytics over that data. I've yet to see an app that does this, that allows you to just start with super simple, jotting down ideas, sketches, and then turn them into something that's super structured and maybe even database level that you can then export and use in your game. That would be kind of like the dream. The issue here is that outside of text itself, the best kind of ways to analyze loose data is visually with spatial representation. So, sketching stuff out is the easiest way to understand the relationship between abstract concepts, and sketching stuff out is best done with raster graphics like bitmaps, where you can use nice pens and different levels of pressure sensitivity, different colors, that kind of stuff. Once you have a bitmap, how do you then annotate that and index that into something that's more database searchable? Maybe the ideal app would have, tags where you can, drag a little circle around this and say, oh, this is blah, blah, blah. Give it a name. Someone out there, if you want to make this app, the floor is yours. But ultimately, these are the apps that I use. Currently, I think Figma is kind of like the most flexible, most powerful for not ideation, but the middle space, which I think a lot of developers spend a lot of time in, where you've got your ideas for your game, you've sketched them out, you're starting to build things and understand how those pieces fit together. And I think the conversations that you want to have where you're trying to understand how your game relates to itself and make it work conceptually, that's best done in these kind of HTML canvases like Figma. While Notion is technically probably the most powerful of these in terms of like project management, database control, managing the information in the best way possible, I would say something like Figma kind of wins in a lot of cases. Like I've done professional documentation for designs inside of Figma just because of the sheer power of how easy it is to move around that canvas. I think canvases are amazing, and documents as a format, as a way of like storing information where you can only see one set document at a time, like one page at a time, I think is kind of going the way of the dodo. At least I would be happy if it did, because it's just so powerful to just take a bunch of ideas and see them next to each other. Like for me, even if this is less indexable than something like Figma, just being able to go like, poof, here's all my level design concepts. Here's 15 different level chunks that I can then use to, design a dungeon with, here's another 15 with a different mechanic, here's another 15. Being able to see these like this, and then maybe even do some interesting stuff where, you know, we take them and we, you know, compare them next to each other. Maybe you could start building a level for a game with something as simple as this. Right, I should be holding Alt here, but you know, that plasticity with a 2D app like this, canvas-based app, pretty good. It gets the job done a lot of the time. So hopefully I've covered most of the stuff here that you guys would use. If you use any of these tools and get a different experience than I do, I'd love to hear about your experience and what works for you. And if you use a different tool, maybe something that's like the Holy Grail that we're looking for here, that does all of this stuff, please let us know, because I love this conversation. I love design software. Project management is something that I didn't really want to cover here, so Trello, that kind of space of just getting stuff done, tracking time, we can cover in a different video. But for today, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Hey pal, thanks for watching, and thanks most especially to the patrons and Twitch subs who support this channel and my game dev project Insignia. To find out more, click the links in the description below. And if you like this video, tell YouTube by clicking the like button, and then YouTube will tell me, and then I'll make more videos. That's nice. Thanks again, and until next time,